Summer began with the sharp hiss of a bus, braking in the thick, sweaty air of the city. Jamie Bennett, 14, stood at the bus stop with a heavy backpack slung over his shoulders and earbuds jammed deep in his ears, even though his phone had died 2 hours ago. He glanced at his mom, a tall, slender woman with tightly tied back hair and thick glasses, as she hurriedly double-checked his bus ticket. "Just 3 months, Jamie," she said, her voice flat like she was reading off a work report. "You need fresh air, and Grandpa could use the help." Jamie didn't answer. He just shrugged, eyes fixed on his dusty sneakers. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay in Boston, where the Wi-Fi was reliable, his friends were close, and gaming marathons could stretch into the night. But his mom had made up her mind. And when she decided something, that was it. No room for debate. The bus ride took 5 hours, weaving through crowded highways that slowly gave way to emptier roads as they pushed into Vermont. The windows rattled in the wind, revealing rolling green hills, thick oak forests, and cornfields that stretched like golden carpets under the sun. Jamie stared outside, but he didn't see beauty, just emptiness. No tall buildings, no honking horns, nothing familiar. When the bus finally pulled into a tiny stop in the middle of nowhere, Jamie stepped off, his sneakers hitting dry, dusty ground. A man stood a few yards away, tall and lean, with tousled gray-streaked hair, a worn plaid shirt, and old leather sandals. That was Al. "Grandpa Al, you've gotten big," Grandpa Al said, his voice deep and a little raspy, squinting into the sunlight. He reached out to pat Jamie's shoulder, but Jamie stepped back, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I don't want to be here," Jamie muttered, eyes down. Grandpa Al let out a soft chuckle, unfazed. He picked up Jamie's backpack and started walking toward an old, dark green pickup truck parked nearby. "That's okay. Vermont'll change your mind," he said, like it was a guarantee. The drive to the farm took another 20 minutes, bumping along a dirt road that twisted through the hills. Grandpa Al's farmhouse finally came into view. A weathered wooden house standing slightly off-center in the middle of a field. The roof had peeling shingles, and the walls were blotched with time and wear. Surrounding it were rows and rows of corn, the stalks swaying shoulder-high in the breeze, with tufts of wild grass poking up here and there. Off to the east stood a crooked little chicken coop, loud with clucking hens. In the distance, a massive oak tree towered over the field like a leafy umbrella. Jamie wrinkled his nose at the earthy smell, mixed faintly with fertilizer. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" he asked, hopeful. Grandpa Al turned and gave a half smile. "Nope, but I got corn, and a dog." The dog, Archimedes, as Grandpa Al introduced him, came bounding out from behind the house. He was a scruffy brown mutt with floppy ears and a tail that wagged like crazy. He barked a few times, circled Grandpa's legs, then looked up at Jamie with wide, curious eyes. Jamie bent down, hand out, about to pet him, but stopped short. "Does he have fleas?" Grandpa Al let out a hearty laugh that echoed across the fields. "Nah, but looks like he already likes you." The first day passed in awkward silence. Grandpa Al moved through his chores like clockwork, scattering corn for the chickens, pulling weeds along the fence, then sitting in the middle of the cornfield with an old harmonica, playing off-key country tunes. Jamie watched from the porch, eyebrows raised. His grandpa was weirder than he'd imagined. Worn-out shirt, ancient sandals, and the way he talked to a handmade scarecrow like it was an old buddy. "Don't slack off, Billy," Grandpa said, pointing at the field. "Corn needs water, not whining." Jamie shook his head and mumbled, "This old man's nuts." He went inside and dragged his suitcase up to the small room upstairs. The wooden bed creaked as he flopped down, and the ceiling above was stained with smoke and cracked with age. His phone was useless. No signal, no data. He tossed it on the pillow and sighed. His mom had told him Grandpa Al was a simple man who'd lived on the farm since she was a kid. But now, watching him from the porch, Jamie didn't see simple. He saw strange. Who would choose to live in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but corn and dirt? He missed his mom. He missed the nights she worked at the kitchen table, always focused, never saying much about Grandpa except he likes his peace and quiet. Now Jamie knew why. The quiet here could drive you crazy. That evening, Grandpa Al called Jamie down for dinner. The wooden kitchen table was covered with an old checkered cloth, and on it sat plates of mashed potatoes and roasted chicken. Jamie sat across from him, fork in hand, barely touching his food. Grandpa Al watched him, eyes patient. "Don't like the food around here?" he asked. Jamie shrugged. "It's not what I'm used to." Grandpa nodded without pressing. Then he got up and pulled an old book from the shelf, a thick law book with a torn cover. "Well then, how about a story?" he said, settling back into his seat. "One made-up tale every night, just one." Jamie frowned, ready to decline, but Grandpa had already started. "Once upon a time," he began in a low, steady voice, "there was a young man who left the city to hide away in the woods. He thought the forest would bring him peace. But he learned something. Peace isn't easy to find. He had to learn to listen. To the wind, to the birds, and most of all, to himself." Jamie toyed with his fork, pretending not to care. But there was something about Grandpa's voice, not the story itself, but the way he told it. Like he wasn't making it up at all, but remembering it. The story ended with the young man finding a small cabin and deciding to stay there. "That's it?" Jamie asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Grandpa Al chuckled softly, standing to clear the plates. "That's it for tonight. Tomorrow there'll be another." That night, as Jamie lay in bed, the sound of Grandpa's harmonica drifted up from downstairs, a slow, slightly mournful tune. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about the last thing Grandpa had said before he went upstairs. "Don't trust what's on the surface, Jamie. Everything's got a layer." Jamie mumbled, "What does that even mean?" But deep down, a seed of curiosity had already been planted, though he wouldn't admit it. Grandpa Al was weird, eccentric, maybe even a little crazy, but something about him made Jamie wonder. Why did someone like that keep reminding him to look deeper? He closed his eyes, the harmonica still playing softly, pulling him into his first night's sleep in Vermont. A sleep that wasn't nearly as peaceful as he'd hoped. The next morning, Jamie was jolted awake by a rooster's loud, obnoxious crowing from the coop on the east side of the house. He blinked as soft sunlight slipped through the wooden blinds, casting long, dusty beams across the floor like invisible fingers. The wall clock, an old thing with slow-moving hands and a steady tick-tock, read 5:30 a.m. He muttered a curse and pulled the blanket over his head to block the noise, but then he heard steady footsteps on the stairs, like a drum beat. "Time to get up, Jamie," Grandpa Al called, voice warm but firm. "Dog needs walking, corn needs watering." Jamie stayed still, hoping he'd go away. But the door creaked open with a sharp click. Grandpa stood in the doorway, tall and lean in a threadbare plaid shirt, holding a beat-up straw hat. His eyes squinted against the early light. "No one sleeps in around here," he said, tossing the hat onto Jamie's bed. It landed next to the pillow with a soft thump. "Let's go." Jamie sat up reluctantly, head foggy, hair sticking up like a bird's nest. He threw on the wrinkled t-shirt from yesterday, jammed the scratchy straw hat onto his head, and trudged downstairs with his sneakers still untied. Grandpa Al was already outside, his old sandals sunk into dew-covered grass, one hand holding Archimedes' leash. The shaggy brown mutt wagged his tail like crazy, barking happily when Jamie stepped out onto the porch. "He likes you," Grandpa said, handing him the leash. The worn leather felt rough in Jamie's hand. "Take him around the field. I'll go grab the water." Jamie took the leash, eyeing Archimedes warily. The dog's floppy ears twitched as Jamie crouched down. "If you bite me, I'm leaving you out here," Jamie muttered, part warning, part curiosity. Archimedes tilted his head like he understood, then tugged Jamie forward toward the cornfield, paws scratching gently against the soft dirt. The field looked strangely beautiful in the early morning light. Nothing like the boring stretch Jamie had imagined the day before. A thin layer of fog hovered over the corn stalks, clinging to the leaves like tiny crystals catching the sun. Pale gold light peeked over the distant hills, warming the tall rows of corn that rose to Jamie's shoulders. He walked slowly, sneakers sinking into the damp earth, while Archimedes trotted ahead, sniffing the ground or digging excitedly every few feet. Jamie wouldn't admit it, but the air here was different, cleaner. No car fumes, no honking horns, just the sound of wind through the corn and a few distant dog barks. When they got back, Grandpa Al was out by the field, watering the crops with a big plastic jug. Water poured in steady streams into the soil, and with his free hand, he played a few off-key notes on his harmonica. Clumsy, but full of life. 5:45 a.m., right on time, he said, glancing at an old wristwatch with a scratched face. "Everything runs on time around here, Jamie. You'll get used to it." Days passed, shaped by Grandpa Al's strange routines. Routines Jamie had started paying closer attention to. For one, Grandpa didn't use a phone. Not even an old flip phone could be found anywhere in the house, no matter how hard Jamie dug through the kitchen drawers. When a delivery man named Joe pulled up in a small red pickup, bringing crates of fresh vegetables, Grandpa paid him in crumpled dollar bills from an old tin box hidden under the table. No credit cards, no payment apps. "Cash is king," Grandpa said with a wink, joking tone but serious eyes. Joe, a stocky man with a wild gray beard and a round belly, laughed heartily, his voice echoing across the yard. "Old Al's a strange one, but he's good people. No one around here grows sweeter corn than he does, kid," he said, giving Jamie a friendly pat on the shoulder. Jamie didn't respond, just shrugged, but noticed Grandpa tense up when Joe pulled out his phone to snap a picture of the cornfield glowing in the midday sun. "Don't take my picture," Grandpa said sharply, his voice suddenly stiff, hand flying up to shield his face like a reflex. Joe chuckled and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Just the landscape, my friend. Don't worry." But Jamie saw it, how Grandpa turned and walked back into the house faster than usual, like he needed to escape the camera's gaze. Whether he liked it or not, Jamie was slowly settling into the rhythm of farm life, though he'd never admit that to Grandpa. Al taught him how to pull weeds around the tomato plants, how to check the dryness of soil by running his hand over it, and how wilted yellow leaves meant it was time to water. "The earth talks to you," Grandpa said, letting a fistful of soil fall through his fingers like fine sand. "If you're willing to listen." Jamie snorted, thinking it was nonsense, but he still followed along. The feeling of mud on his hands didn't gross him out the way it had on the first day. He started to bond with Archimedes, too, often sitting under the oak tree with the shaggy dog stretched out beside him, Jamie's hand resting on its thick fur as it let out lazy yawns. "You're not so bad," Jamie murmured, and Archimedes wagged his tail, licking Jamie's hand with a warm, wet tongue. From a distance, Grandpa watched them through the haze of smoke from his old wooden pipe, smiling quietly. He's got a good nose for picking friends, he said, his voice carrying meaning beyond the words. One warm afternoon, Grandpa looked up from his gardening and said, "We need a secret lookout post." Jamie raised an eyebrow, sipping the cold water Grandpa had just handed him. "A lookout? For what?" Grandpa pointed toward the giant oak tree in the middle of the field, its thick branches swaying gently in the breeze. "Up there. You can see the whole world from that high." It sounded ridiculous, but Jamie was curious, and honestly he was getting bored of sitting around inside. So they started building the fort, scavenging old wooden planks from the chicken coop, measuring with Grandpa's rusted tape, and hauling the boards up into the tree with a frayed rope. Jamie argued when Grandpa told him to nail the boards in straight. "You're doing it wrong. They'll hold better if you angle the nails," Jamie snapped, pointing to a loose board. Grandpa didn't get angry. He just gave a soft chuckle, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "You're sharp. Do it your way, then." They bickered, then burst out laughing when Jamie's first nail bent sideways from hammering too hard. Little by little, the fort came together. Small, crooked, just big enough for two people to sit in. But it was theirs. Standing at the base of the tree, Jamie looked up at the finished hideout, a strange feeling blooming in his chest, like he'd actually done something that mattered. That night, after a dinner of hot cornbread and hearty bean stew, Grandpa Al sat in the old armchair in the living room, reading a thick law book under the flickering light of an oil lamp. Jamie watched him, more curious now than the day before. "Why do you read that boring stuff?" he asked, fiddling with a crumb of cornbread on his plate. Grandpa looked up, eyes distant, like he was staring past Jamie into some far-off place. "Law is how people keep order," he said softly. "I like knowing it. Helps me understand where I stand in this world." Jamie didn't quite get it, but he didn't ask more. Later, as Grandpa cleared the dishes, Jamie noticed him open a small wooden cabinet beside the sink. He reached inside and rested his hand on a metal box with a rusty latch, its surface scratched and worn. Grandpa stood there for a moment, fingers brushing the lock, eyes dark with memory, like he was drifting somewhere far back in time. Then he shut the cabinet abruptly, the sharp click breaking the stillness in the quiet house. Jamie lay in bed, listening to the chorus of crickets outside the open window. He thought about the day, pulling weeds, building the fort, and Archimedes now curled up at the foot of his bed, breathing steadily. Life here wasn't as bad as he'd imagined, even if there was still no Wi-Fi and he still missed his late-night games back home. Just before he drifted off, Grandpa Al knocked gently and stepped in with a soft smile on his face. "You did good today," he said, hands in his pockets. "Tomorrow I've got a new story for you. But that box—" He paused, eyes locking with Jamie's, serious but kind. "Only open it if I'm no longer able to tell them. Got it?" Jamie nodded, even though his head was spinning with questions. "Yeah, but what's in it?" Grandpa gave a faint smile and turned to go. "Just old memories. You'll find out, once I run out of stories." The harmonica started up again downstairs, its slow, wistful notes drifting through the crack under the door. Jamie closed his eyes, that strange feeling in his chest growing stronger. Grandpa Al was weird, no doubt about that, but something about him, the steady patience, the way he moved through each day like the ticking of that old clock, made Jamie start to let his guard down. Just a little. The treehouse, Archimedes, and that mysterious metal box. They all felt like puzzle pieces Jamie hadn't figured out yet. But for the first time since arriving in Vermont, he wasn't bored. Maybe this place wasn't just corn and dirt. Maybe it was something deeper, something he hadn't quite seen yet. Friday morning in Vermont began not with the usual rooster crow, but with the heavy patter of rain on the old wooden roof. Jamie woke to the sound of water dripping steadily from the ceiling onto the floor. He opened his eyes and saw a small puddle forming by the foot of the bed. Soft gray light seeping in through the window, illuminating long cracks in the ceiling. He sighed. "This house is about to fall apart," he muttered. Downstairs, Grandpa's voice rang out, low but urgent. "Jamie, get down here! Roof's leaking! Needs fixing now!" Jamie reluctantly rolled out of bed, pulled on an old hoodie, and shuffled down the stairs, yesterday's muddy sneakers still on his feet. Grandpa stood in the kitchen, holding a dented red plastic bucket, setting it under the leak near the dining table. Rain splattered through a hole in the roof, spraying water across the worn wooden floor. "Grab the ladder from the chicken coop," he said, voice sharp. "No joking today." Jamie nodded and ran outside into the rain, his clothes soaked within seconds. Cold wind whipped through the field, carrying the earthy scent of wet soil and corn. He hauled the old wooden ladder from the coop, grunting under its weight, then dragged it back into the house. Grandpa climbed up, hammer and a small tarp in hand, patching the hole as best he could. "Hold the ladder steady," he said, and Jamie did, watching silently as his grandpa worked. When he climbed back down, his plaid shirt clung to his back, soaked through, and his salt and pepper hair was plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were sharp. "Rain like this isn't good for the corn," he muttered, almost to himself. Jamie looked at him, puzzled. "Why do you care more about the corn than the house?" Grandpa gave a faint chuckle and wiped his face with his sleeve. "Corn keeps the farm alive. A house you can fix. Dead crops. You can't bring those back." Jamie didn't say anything, but he heard something in the way Grandpa said it. Like the corn meant more than just food. Like it was something sacred. The rain lasted through noon, keeping them stuck inside. Grandpa sat in his old armchair, reading from the thick law book under the dim glow of the oil lamp, occasionally jotting notes with a dull pencil. Jamie sat by the kitchen table, fiddling with the harmonica Grandpa had left there, trying to blow a few notes. All that came out was a squeaky screech. Archimedes lay at his feet, yawning, ears drooping every time thunder rolled in the distance. As Grandpa focused on his book, Jamie heard him mumble something, barely audible, like a thought slipping out. "Charlie, don't run off." Jamie froze. "Charlie?" he asked, eyebrows raised. Grandpa flinched, startled. He looked up, eyes wide for a second before his expression hardened. "What?" "You just called Archimedes Charlie," Jamie said, staring at him. Grandpa gave a strained smile and set the book down. "Old age, kid. My brain's going fuzzy. Archimedes is Archimedes, don't mind me." But Jamie noticed. He looked at Archimedes, then at his grandfather, that strange feeling rising in his chest again. Grandpa Al wasn't the forgetful type. Everything he did was precise. From walking the dog at exactly 5:45 a.m. to measuring the boards for the treehouse, he never missed a beat. Calling the dog by the wrong name? That wasn't like him at all. Jamie wanted to ask more, but Grandpa stood up and clapped his hands. "Rain stopped. Let's hit the market." Jamie nodded, though his mind was still spinning with questions. The market sat a few miles from the farm, a row of makeshift wooden stalls tucked under big, shady trees. The rain had just let up, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh vegetables and warm bread. Locals milled about, chatting, laughing, kids running around on the muddy ground. Grandpa Al pushed a rusty cart, picking up a few potatoes, a bunch of carrots, and a bag of dried beans, paying in cash like always. Jamie walked beside him, hands in his pockets, glancing around with quiet curiosity. This wasn't anything like a Boston supermarket. It felt more personal, and a little strange. Then it happened. An older woman, silver hair tied neatly back, gray sweater clinging to her small frame, stepped away from the vegetable stand across the way. She froze when she saw Grandpa Al, eyes wide, hands trembling so badly she dropped an onion onto the ground. "Charles?" she whispered, voice shaking. "Charles Bennett? It can't be." Jamie turned, saw Grandpa stiffen, both hands gripping the cart until his knuckles turned white. "You've got the wrong man," he said quickly, voice cold and sharp. "Name's Al Wallace. Don't know you." Her name tag read Martha, and she shook her head, stepping closer. "No, I remember." "Your eyes? Your voice? Chicago? 1975. That case?" But Grandpa didn't let her finish. He grabbed Jamie's wrist and pulled him away, walking so fast Jamie almost tripped. "Let's go," he muttered, not looking back. The drive home was silent. Grandpa's hands clenched the steering wheel, eyes locked on the road. Jamie sat beside him, sneaking glances, heart pounding. "Who was she?" Jamie finally asked, his voice low. "No one," Grandpa said too quickly. "She called you Charles," Jamie pressed. Grandpa turned his head just slightly, eyes sharp but not angry. "Old folks mix things up, Jamie. Don't read into it." But Jamie could see it. His hands trembled on the wheel, and for the first time since arriving, Grandpa didn't smile when he spoke. Back at the house, Grandpa went straight to the kitchen and started making bean soup like nothing had happened. Jamie climbed up to the treehouse, staring down at his grandfather through the window, his mind racing. Martha knew him, not as Al Wallace, but as Charles Bennett. And what did she mean by that case? He remembered the moment Grandpa had called Archimedes Charlie and the flash of panic in his eyes. He wasn't confused. He was hiding something. Jamie jumped down from the fort and ran into the house, quietly pulling open the kitchen drawer while Grandpa stirred the soup. Nothing but old silverware and a torn notebook. He looked up at the bookshelf. Thick law books, a few family photos, but none of Grandpa from when he was younger. Nothing to prove anything. That night, Grandpa told another one of his made-up stories. This one about a man living in the forest, hiding from his past. But Jamie didn't roll his eyes this time. He sat still, listening to every word, searching for clues in the tone, the pauses, the phrasing. When the story ended, Jamie looked up and asked, "Have you ever run away from something?" Grandpa paused, staring at him longer than usual. "Everyone runs at some point," he said quietly. "The real question is, what are you running from?" He stood, turned off the oil lamp, and left Jamie sitting in the dark with 1,000 questions buzzing in his head. Jamie lay in bed as soft rain returned, tapping gently on the roof. Grandpa Al wasn't the simple man Mom had made him out to be. He wasn't just some odd farmer with quirks. He was hiding a past, a name, a truth Jamie hadn't uncovered yet. He looked down at Archimedes sleeping on the floor and whispered, "Charlie, huh? Maybe the dog knew something too." Jamie didn't sleep that night. The rain still tapped steadily against the window, blending with the soft snoring of Archimedes curled at the foot of the bed. Jamie lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the cracks in the ceiling like they were whispering Martha's words back to him. Charles Bennett, Chicago, 1975. That name echoed in his mind, unfamiliar but haunting, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture he thought he knew. His grandfather, the man in worn-out sandals who played harmonica for the corn, couldn't possibly be Charles. But the panic in his eyes, the way he yanked Jamie away from the market, and the slip of calling Archimedes Charlie, all of it screamed that something was off. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy and damp. Grandpa Al was up early, like always, walking Archimedes through the cornfield at 5:45 sharp. Jamie stayed in bed, pretending to sleep, but his eyes peeked through the crack in the door. Grandpa wore his usual worn plaid shirt and straw hat, walking in that steady rhythm like nothing had happened the day before. As soon as he disappeared behind the corn, Jamie sat up, heart pounding. This was his chance. He needed to know the truth about that metal box hidden in the cupboard, the one Grandpa said to open only when he could no longer tell stories. Jamie crept downstairs, his sneakers making barely a sound on the wooden floor. The kitchen was quiet, just the ticking clock and the lingering scent of last night's bean soup. He walked to the small wooden cabinet beside the sink, the one he'd seen Grandpa touch before. Locked. A small rusted padlock held the door shut. Sturdy, despite its age. Jamie rummaged through the kitchen drawer, hands trembling. Old silverware, a few loose coins, a bent paperclip. But no key. He stood there, breathing hard until he remembered. During the treehouse build, Grandpa had left a small key ring on the kitchen table when he grabbed the rope. He ran to the porch, eyes scanning the room. There, hanging from a wooden hook by the door, mixed in with fishing lines and tangled string. Jamie grabbed the key ring, his fingers shaking so badly he dropped one of the keys. The metallic clink hit the floor, loud in the silence. He froze, glanced toward the door. No one. Grandpa was still out in the field. He picked up the key and hurried back to the cabinet. One by one he tried the keys. The third one, small, round-headed, fit. With a dry click, the latch released, and the door creaked open. Inside sat the metal box. It looked even older up close, scratched, rusted along the edges, like it had lived through decades. Jamie took a deep breath and placed it on the table. His hands trembled as he unlatched the lid. No lock, just a simple clasp. But it felt like opening a door he wasn't meant to touch. Inside were pieces of another life. The first item, an old military ID. The plastic was yellowed, edges torn. The photo showed a young man, short brown hair, sharp eyes, tight-lipped expression. It was unmistakable. Grandpa Al only younger, sterner. The name beside the photo, Charles K. Bennett, born 1945, branch U.S. Army, service 1965 to 1968. Jamie stared. Breath caught in his throat. This was his grandfather, but not Al Wallace. Beneath the ID was a black and white wedding photo, folded in the middle like it had been crammed away in a hurry. The man, Charles Bennett, wore a suit, standing beside a young woman with long, curly hair and a warm smile. They held hands in front of a small church, a few blurry guests behind them. Jamie studied the woman. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't anyone he recognized from family photos. His heart pounded faster. Grandpa had been married before? Then who was Jamie's mother? At the bottom of the box, Jamie found a thin stack of papers bound by an old rubber band. The top page was stamped in red. Witness Protection Order, Confidential. Below that, a legal name change form. Dated March 15, 1976, Charles K. Bennett became Albert Wallace. New residence, Vermont. Reason: personal safety following cooperation with federal investigators. Tucked inside the file was a small note written in shaky handwriting. I don't want them to find her. Forgive me, L. Jamie read it over and over, mind spinning. Witness protection. Who had Grandpa been? And who was she? Jamie collapsed into the chair, head in his hands, papers scattered across the table like fallen leaves. Everything he thought he knew about his grandfather had shattered, like glass, sharp and sudden. Grandpa wasn't just a quirky old farmer. He was someone else, with a different name, a different life. All those made-up stories about the man hiding in the woods, the one who left his past behind, they weren't fiction. They were truths disguised as bedtime tales. Jamie felt betrayed, like he'd been lied to from the moment he stepped onto this farm. But more than anything, he felt lost. If Grandpa wasn't Al Wallace, then who was he? And what did that make Jamie? He heard footsteps on the porch, the familiar sound of Grandpa's worn sandals tapping across the damp wooden floor. Jamie froze. He scrambled to shove the papers back into the box, hands shaking. The wedding photo slipped from his grasp and fluttered to the ground. Grandpa stepped into the kitchen, Archimedes trailing behind, soaked and panting. He stopped short, eyes landing on the metal box still sitting on the table. Then he looked at Jamie. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. "You," Grandpa began, voice hoarse but didn't finish. Jamie stood up, clutching the edge of the table, eyes red and wet. "Who are you?" he yelled, voice breaking. "Charles Bennett? You're not even my real grandfather, are you?" Grandpa didn't answer right away. He stepped forward and bent down to pick up the photo, fingers gently brushing over the woman's face. His eyes darkened, deep, distant, as if he was staring into a place Jamie couldn't reach. "You opened it," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "I told you, only when I couldn't tell stories anymore." Jamie's fists clenched. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "You lied to me. Everything was a lie." But Grandpa didn't get angry. He didn't defend himself. He simply set the photo back down on the table, gently. "Not everything," he said, "but I'll tell you the truth, when you're ready." Jamie didn't eat dinner that night. He climbed up to the treehouse, curled beneath the patchy wooden roof, watching the rain slip through the branches of the oak. Grandpa didn't follow. He didn't call out. Just stood at the kitchen window, tall and still, harmonica in hand but silent. Jamie hugged his knees, mind replaying the images from the box. Charles Bennett, witness protection, a woman he'd never seen. He wasn't who Jamie thought he was. But if not, then who? And why was he still here, telling stories every night like nothing had ever happened? After that night, the farmhouse felt heavy, like the sky before a storm. Jamie stayed in bed, curled beneath the blanket, staring at the ceiling while his thoughts circled the same questions. He didn't come down for breakfast. Grandpa didn't knock on the door, didn't play the harmonica, didn't say a word. Jamie could hear him moving around downstairs, slow, steady, like he was carrying something far heavier than groceries or tools. Archimedes lay at the foot of Jamie's bed, yawning quietly, ears drooping, as if he too could feel the weight hanging in the air. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cornfield and painted the sky in faded orange, Grandpa appeared in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual flannel shirt. Instead, he had on a gray wool sweater, hands tucked in his pockets, eyes quiet and solemn. "Come sit with me," he said, voice gravelly but gentle. "It's time for a real story." Jamie didn't reply, but he got up, pulled on his hoodie, and followed. He didn't want to hear it, not really. He didn't want more pieces of a truth that tore apart the man he thought he knew. But still, his legs moved, like pulled by a string he couldn't see. They sat on the porch, in two old wooden chairs that creaked every time they shifted. A light drizzle fell, tapping the roof above, soft but steady, like a curtain between them and the rest of the world. Grandpa pulled a weathered wooden pipe from his pocket, packed it, lit it, and took a slow, deep drag. The smoke curled up around them, white and ghostly in the damp evening air. He stared into the distance, beyond the corn. "I'm not telling made-up stories tonight, Jamie," he said quietly. "You saw the box, so now I'll tell you why it's there." Jamie sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the chair, eyes fixed on the worn wooden floor beneath them. Grandpa Al began to speak, his voice slow and steady, like each word was an old scar being reopened. "I used to be Charles Bennett," he said quietly. "An accountant in Chicago, back in the 70s. Not a big shot, just a guy working in a small office, crunching numbers for people who paid their bills on time. Or so I thought." He paused, taking a deep drag from his pipe. Smoke curled up around his wrinkled face. "I didn't realize," he continued, "that the numbers I was balancing weren't clean. They were dirty. Drug money, heroin, tied to people I never wanted to be mixed up with." Jamie looked up at him, eyes burning, voice shaky. "You knew and kept working for them?" Grandpa nodded, not flinching. "At first, I didn't know, but when I found out, I was scared. I had a family, my wife, Laura, and a baby girl. I couldn't just quit. Couldn't go to the police. I was a coward, Jamie." He turned to look at Jamie, his eyes red. "Until one day, I saw a boy, no older than you, lying dead on the sidewalk, needle still in his arm. And I knew. The money I'd kept clean had helped kill him." The memory flooded his face, clear and raw. He spoke of that night, of sirens wailing down the alley, of red and blue lights flashing against old brick walls. He'd stood in his office, hands trembling, ledger in hand, listening to a mother scream in the street. "I didn't sleep that night," he said. "Laura asked if something was wrong. I didn't answer. I knew then I had to end it." So he went to the FBI, turned over the records, named names, and in return, they promised him protection. But the cost was everything. Jamie's voice caught. "You left? What do you mean you left?" Grandpa let out a long breath, setting the pipe down beside him, covering his face with his hands. "Laura couldn't take it, the fear, the constant hiding. When the Witness Protection Program took me in, they gave me a new name, a new life, Al Wallace, Vermont. I wanted to bring her and our daughter with me, but Laura refused. She said I'd already destroyed her life. She couldn't live always looking over her shoulder." He looked at Jamie, eyes raw. "I left her in Chicago. I took our daughter with me. Your mom was raised knowing only Al Wallace. She never knew the truth." Jamie stood so fast the wooden chair toppled behind him. "She doesn't know," he shouted, tears spilling down his face. "You lied to my mom. You lied to everyone. Who the hell are you to do that?" Grandpa didn't move. He didn't try to defend himself. He just looked up, pain carved deep into his face. "I didn't lie to her, Jamie. I protected her. If those people had found out Charles Bennett was still alive, if they found her, they would have killed us all. I ran so she could grow up safe." Jamie turned away, hands on his head, stepping to the edge of the porch, letting the light rain soak into his hair. "That woman in the wedding photo," he said, voice barely audible. "Who was she?" Grandpa picked up his pipe but didn't smoke it, just held it, like something solid to hold on to. "Laura, your mom's real mother. I loved her, but I couldn't keep her. When I came to Vermont, I raised my daughter alone. Later, I met your grandmother, my second wife. She passed away when your mom was still young, and I never told anyone about Laura, never said a word." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and wind brushing through the cornfield. Jamie turned back, tears streaking down his cheeks. "You're not who I thought you were," he whispered. "You're not my grandfather. You're just Charles Bennett, a man who ran." Grandpa stood, slowly, stepping closer but not touching him. "I was Charles," he said, voice firm, "but I am Al Wallace to you. I may not be your grandfather by blood. Your mom was Laura's child, but your grandmother raised her. Still, the love I've given you, Jamie, that's real. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to understand." Jamie didn't answer. He ran to the treehouse, climbing the wet wooden rungs, curling up under the shelter of the oak. Grandpa Al didn't follow. He just stood under the porch, looking up at Jamie through the rain. Then he turned back inside, walked into the kitchen, and took the small mirror off the wall. He stared into it, the lines on his face deep and still. "That man in the mirror isn't me," he whispered, "but the one who loves that boy. That's me." He set the mirror down, returned to his chair, and picked up the harmonica. A slow, aching tune drifted into the rain, weaving through the quiet, rising up to the treehouse where Jamie cried alone. Hugging his knees, Jamie thought of his mother, the stern but kind woman back in Boston who never knew who her father really was. He thought of Grandpa Al, no, Charles, and the years he'd spent in hiding, planting corn, telling stories, maybe as some kind of penance. Jamie didn't know what to feel, anger, sorrow, or both. But as the harmonica's notes floated through the mist, he realized something. Grandpa hadn't told his story to justify himself. He told it so Jamie could finally see him, truly, fully, without masks. The morning after the porch conversation, Jamie woke with swollen eyes and a throat like sandpaper. The rooster crowed from the coop, but he didn't move. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers his grandfather couldn't. Charles Bennett. That name stuck in his head like a stubborn stain. His grandfather, Al Wallace, the man who told stories, grew corn, played harmonica, wasn't who Jamie thought. His mother didn't know her father had once worked for criminals, had abandoned a wife in Chicago, had rewritten his entire life. All those bedtime stories. Now they felt like theater, a script written to keep the truth buried. Jamie sat up suddenly, hands shaking as he pulled his suitcase from under the bed. "I'm not staying here," he muttered, voice rough. He stuffed his clothes into the bag, hoodies, jeans, his muddy sneakers, not caring if they were folded or not. He wanted to call his mom, wanted her to pick him up now, to take him away from Vermont, away from Grandpa, away from this farm built on lies. But when he reached for his phone, he remembered. No signal. No way to contact anyone. He slammed his fist into the mattress, yelling, "Damn it!" Archimedes stirred, lifting his head from the corner of the room, wide eyes blinking at him. Footsteps echoed up the stairs. Grandpa's steady, predictable stride. Then the knock. "Jamie," he said gently from the other side of the door. "Come down and have some breakfast?" Jamie didn't answer. He kept packing, the rustle of fabric drowning out the voice. Another knock, then silence. The footsteps faded away. Jamie grabbed his suitcase and yanked it into the hallway. He didn't know how he'd leave, but he would, even if he had to walk to town and beg someone to drive him back to Boston. But as he passed the kitchen table, his eyes caught something. A small notebook resting on the wood. It hadn't been there yesterday. He stopped, one hand still gripping the suitcase handle, the other slowly reaching for the book. Old leather cover, torn edges, bound with a thin rubber band. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, made him set his suitcase down and step closer. Grandpa wasn't in the house. Jamie could hear the faint sound of corn scattering by the chicken coop outside. He took a breath and pulled the band off, flipped open the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's, shaky but bold. The made-up stories for Jamie. Jamie frowned, turning the page. It was all there, every story Grandpa had ever told him. The man hiding in the woods, the boy who left the city, the drifter living alone in the prairie, each written by hand in pencil or blue ink, some pages smudged with water stains, maybe from rain or tears. But next to every story was a note, written in black ink, smaller, more careful. "That should have been my life, if I'd been brave sooner." Jamie sat down, hands trembling as he turned each page. The man in the woods. I wanted to leave Chicago. But I wasn't brave enough until it was too late. The boy who left the city. I didn't leave Laura because I wanted to. I left because I didn't know what else to do. The loner in the prairie. I chose corn because I couldn't face people anymore. Each note hit Jamie like a blade, sharp not with anger, but with something heavier. Understanding. Grandpa hadn't told those stories to deceive him. He'd told them to confess. First to himself. And now, to Jamie. Jamie turned to the last page of the notebook. A loose slip of paper fell out. A short letter, the handwriting shakier than the rest. Jamie, if you're reading this, I hope you don't hate me. I'm not as good as you thought I was, but I tried. Everything I've done here, planting, raising a dog, telling stories, was my way of making up for what I didn't do when I was Charles. I don't expect you to call me Grandpa anymore, but I hope you understand. I love you, no matter who I am. At the bottom, Al, Charles. Jamie clutched his head as tears fell onto the page, blurring the word love. He stood up, grabbed the notebook, and ran to the treehouse. There, beneath the thick branches of the oak, he looked out over the cornfield, his heart pounding. He thought of Grandpa Al, the man who once was Charles Bennett, a coward, a man who ran, but also the man who stood up against a gang to save kids like that boy on the sidewalk, a man who planted corn, told stories, and tried to be something better. He hadn't hidden his past to deceive. He'd hidden it because he was ashamed, because he was afraid Jamie would only see him as a failure. Jamie walked back to the house, dragged his suitcase into his room, but didn't finish packing. Instead, he went to the kitchen, opened the cupboard where the metal box still sat, untouched since the day before. He took it outside, to the backyard, where a small brick fire pit stood, built for burning dry brush. Grandpa was still out in the fields, his tall figure lost among the rows of corn. Jamie lit a fire. Flames rose quickly, licking at the dry wood he'd stacked. One by one, he fed the papers to the fire. Military ID, wedding photo, witness protection documents. The flames swallowed them whole. Smoke curled into the gray sky, carrying the name Charles Bennett away on the Vermont wind. He kept only one thing, the handwritten note. I don't want them to find her. He folded it and slipped it into his pocket. A quiet reminder. When Grandpa returned, carrying the plastic jug he used to water the corn, he froze in the yard. His eyes locked on the fading embers still glowing in the pit. What did you do? He asked, voice hoarse. Jamie stepped toward him, hands in his pockets, eyes still red but no longer crying. If you were a bad man, Jamie said, voice steady, you wouldn't have spent your life planting things, raising a dog, and telling me stories. He took a breath. Charles Bennett is gone. You're Al Wallace. You're my grandfather. Grandpa didn't speak. He dropped the water jug, letting it spill into the grass, and walked forward. Then, for the first time since Jamie arrived, he pulled him into a hug. Jamie felt his grandfather's breath shake. The scent of old tobacco clung to his sweater. The weight of years lifted in that one embrace. Thank you, Grandpa whispered, voice breaking. Jamie didn't say anything. He just hugged him back, the heaviness in his chest dissolving like smoke from the fire. They stood there in the yard, with Archimedes circling their feet, barking happily. Jamie didn't need more explanations. The notebook had said it all. Grandpa wasn't perfect, but he had stayed. He had chosen Jamie, even when his own past tried to bury him. After that embrace, the house felt lighter. as if the last of the storm had finally washed the dust away. The next morning, Jamie woke up early. Not because of the rooster, but because he wanted to. He came downstairs to find Grandpa at the sink, holding a mug of black coffee, his eyes softer than usual. "You're up early," Grandpa said, taking a sip. Jamie shrugged, offered a small smile. "I want to build something. That treehouse is still not done." Grandpa nodded and set the mug down. "Then let's go." They walked out to the big oak tree in the field, where the half-built fort still stood, its roof sagging from the recent rain. Archimedes trotted after them, tail wagging, barking excitedly when he saw them carrying the toolbox. Jamie climbed up first, hauling new planks from the chicken coop, ones Grandpa had prepared earlier. Grandpa stood below, handing up nails and the old hammer, his sandals pressing into the damp grass. "Paint it," he said, nodding toward the can of white paint near the coop. Jamie frowned. "White? That's boring." Grandpa chuckled. "Then pick a color you like." Jamie scanned the yard and spotted a pale green can beside the haystack. "Green," he said, "like the corn." They spent the morning painting the treehouse, the sounds of hammering and brushing mixing with their laughter. Jamie got paint all over his hands, smeared some on his hoodie, but he didn't care. Grandpa told a story about the time he painted the chicken coop the wrong color, bright red instead of brown, and the whole town laughed about it for a season. "I've never had much of an eye for color," he said with a wink. Jamie laughed, really laughed, for the first time since arriving in Vermont. It didn't feel like they were just painting a treehouse. It felt like they were rebuilding something between them. When the paint dried, Jamie took out a pocket knife and carved into the main beam. "Secret lookout, Jamie and Al." Grandpa looked at the words, his eyes softening. "That's beautiful," he said, and gently patted Jamie's shoulder. That afternoon, Jamie had a new idea. "You should write down your real stories," he said, sitting up in the treehouse, holding the notebook Grandpa had left on the kitchen table. Grandpa raised an eyebrow as he sat beside him, the oak leaves rustling above. "You sure? You want to hear more old man tales?" Jamie shook his head. "Not about Charles Bennett? About you, Al Wallace? What you did here? With the corn? With Archimedes? With me?" Grandpa looked at him, surprised, then smiled softly. "You keep surprising me, kid." They started that very evening. Grandpa sat in his armchair, the notebook open on the table, a pencil in hand. Jamie sat across from him, holding a flashlight while the oil lamp flickered low. Grandpa began, "When I first got to Vermont, I didn't know squat about farming. Killed a whole field of corn by overwatering it." Jamie laughed and jotted down a line beneath it. "A silly old man tried to become a farmer, and the corn forgave him." Grandpa squinted at the page, then laughed. "You make it sound better than I ever could." They kept going. Stories about how he found Archimedes near the woods, how he sang country songs to the scarecrow to encourage the corn, how they built the treehouse together. Every story was retold in a childlike voice, as if Grandpa had been given a second chance at life, one with no shadows from the past. By the weekend, Jamie had a bigger idea. "We should have a story night," he said, holding up the now nearly full notebook. "Invite the local kids. You tell the stories and I'll do the drawings." Grandpa hesitated. "I'm not great at public speaking." Jamie grinned. "You've been telling me stories every night. What's the difference?" Grandpa looked at him with warmth in his eyes. "All right, for you." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jamie ran around the area, knocking on neighbors' doors. The Joe family, little Lily with the long, braided hair, and a few others. Grandpa chopped wood for a fire pit in the yard, and found an old bed sheet in the chicken coop to use as a projector screen. Jamie drew simple illustrations. Grandpa with his harmonica, Archimedes chasing chickens, the green treehouse in the oak. They were messy, but charming. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, a small crowd gathered around the fire, about a dozen kids and a few adults. The wood cracked and popped in the pit, the air rich with the scent of roasted corn Grandpa had prepared earlier. Grandpa stood at the center of the yard, harmonica in hand, voice slightly shaking as he began. Once upon a time, there was an old man who came to Vermont with nothing but 2 empty hands. He glanced at Jamie, who gave him a small nod. He didn't know anything except how to ruin a cornfield, but he learned, from the dirt, from a dog, from long, slow days. Jamie shined the flashlight onto the bedsheet, revealing a drawing of Grandpa tripping in a field of crooked corn. The kids burst out laughing. Little Lily shouted, "You're funny, mister." Grandpa chuckled and continued. Then he found a dog, Archimedes, and the dog taught him that life doesn't have to be so serious. Another drawing appeared, Archimedes chasing chickens. More laughter. The final story was about the treehouse. "That old man had a grandson who came from the city," he said, voice softer now. The boy didn't like corn or the old man, but he helped build a lookout, and in doing so, the old man realized he wasn't alone anymore. Jamie shone the last drawing. A boy and an old man standing on the treehouse, green cornfields stretching behind them. The kids clapped. A few grown-ups nodded. Joe called out, "That was a good one, Al." Grandpa sat down, hands trembling slightly, but his eyes glowing. Jamie leaned over, patted his back, and whispered, "You did great." The night ended with the kids heading home, still giggling, the yard filled with nothing but the crackle of fading fire and the scent of ash. Jamie and Grandpa climbed back into the treehouse, looking up at the stars through the canopy of the oak. "You make me feel seen," Grandpa said quietly. "Even after all these years in the shadows, tonight, I didn't feel like I was hiding." Jamie smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "This summer was better than Wi-Fi," he said, half joking, half true. Grandpa laughed softly, pulled out his harmonica, and played a slow, winding melody. It drifted across the field, light as wind, warm as memory, a sound that said, "We found each other." Summer in Vermont passed faster than Jamie expected. By late August, the cornfields towered over his head, the green stalks swaying gently in the breeze, carrying the sweet scent of soil and sunshine. The treehouse in the old oak was sturdier now, its green paint dry and fresh. The carved words, "Secret Lookout, Jamie and Al," still stood bold on the main beam. Jamie wasn't the city kid who once hated the countryside. He'd grown used to the rooster's morning call, the sound of Grandpa Al's harmonica, and the way Archimedes wagged his tail every time Jamie stepped out onto the porch. On the morning his mom came to pick him up, Jamie stood on the porch holding the notebook Grandpa had left him, now filled with real stories, rewritten in Jamie's voice. Grandpa Al stood beside him in his worn flannel shirt, coffee mug in hand, eyes fixed on the bumpy dirt road where the car would soon appear. "You'll come back, won't you?" he asked, voice low, trying to hide the worry beneath it. Jamie smiled and shrugged. "Of course. I still need to check on your corn." Grandpa chuckled, giving him a light but warm pat on the shoulder. The sound of an engine hummed in the distance, and a silver sedan rolled slowly past the fields. Jamie's mom stepped out, hair tied back, thick glasses just like always. But this time, she smiled. A rare smile, softer than the one she wore back in Boston. She hugged Jamie tight, then turned to Grandpa, and hugged him tighter than Jamie expected. "Thank you, Dad," she said gently. "Jamie's grown a lot." Grandpa nodded, eyes distant, a flicker of sadness behind them as he looked at her. His daughter, who never knew he had once been Charles Bennett, who never knew about the years he spent running to protect her. "He's a good kid," Grandpa said, hands in his pockets. "Just like you." Jamie looked at his mom, then at Grandpa. Something stirred inside him. She didn't know the truth, and he had decided not to tell her, not to hide it, but to preserve who Grandpa had become. The man who planted corn and told stories, not the one who once ran from Chicago. She packed Jamie's things into the trunk, asking a few questions about the summer. "It was great," Jamie answered simply. "I liked it here?" She didn't press for more, and he knew she never would fully understand what had passed between him and Grandpa. Just before getting into the car, Jamie ran back inside. He placed the notebook on the kitchen table and flipped to the first page. With a blue pen, he wrote, "The Storyteller Who Played Harmonica for Corn, written by Jamie Bennett, based on the stories of Al Wallace." He left it there, a gift, a promise that the story wouldn't be forgotten. Grandpa stood on the porch, watching him climb into the car, giving a small wave. Archimedes barked a few times and chased the car for a bit before stopping in the middle of the field. Back in Boston, Jamie didn't dive back into online games or lost hours of Wi-Fi. Instead, he sat in his room, opened his laptop, and started typing. He rewrote the stories from the notebook into children's tales, about Grandpa Al learning to farm, about Archimedes chasing chickens, about the green treehouse in the cornfield. He sketched illustrations with pencil, Grandpa playing the harmonica, corn growing like magic around him, and had a friend from school help scan them into digital files. Every night, Jamie worked. Not out of pressure, but because he wanted to. He wanted to keep Grandpa Al, not Charles Bennett, but Al, alive in every page. The following spring, as new corn sprouted in the fields of Vermont, Jamie returned to the farm with a gift. He stepped off the bus carrying a printed book. Green cover, the title embossed in white. The Storyteller Who Played Harmonica for Corn. Below the title were two names, his and Al's. Grandpa stood on the porch, his old sandals pressing into the wood, surprise in his eyes as he spotted Jamie. "What's this?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Jamie handed him the book and smiled. "I didn't keep your secret. I rewrote it as a story." Grandpa took the book, his hands shaking so much he nearly dropped it. He turned page after page, staring at Jamie's drawings, him with the harmonica, Archimedes, the green treehouse, and reading the words that captured his life in Vermont, not Chicago. He paused at the final page, where Jamie had written, "For my grandfather, the man who taught me even corn has a story to tell." Grandpa looked up, eyes glistening, voice caught in his throat. "You gave me a new name, Jamie." Jamie nodded, hugging him. "You earned it." They sat together in their two chairs on the porch, gazing out at the young green corn stretching into the horizon. The spring wind carried the scent of fresh soil, and the soft rustling of corn leaves whispered through the air. Grandpa lifted his harmonica and played a tune, gentle, bittersweet, filled with the weight and warmth of a lifetime. Jamie leaned back, holding a small yellow daisy Grandpa had planted near the house, plucking its petals one by one and letting them fall. "What were you thinking when you wrote the book?" Grandpa asked, lowering the harmonica. Jamie looked at him, eyes shining. "I thought people can have a lot of names, but only one heart. And yours is the best one I've ever known." Grandpa smiled, the truest smile Jamie had ever seen. No longer carrying the shadow of Charles Bennett, no longer weighed down by shame. Just a man looking out over his fields with a full heart and an open sky. "You're right," he whispered. "And this heart, it's here, with you, with the corn, with Vermont." They sat in silence, listening to the breeze and the whisper of young corn, as if the land itself agreed. Jamie never told anyone about that summer. Not his mom, not his friends. But every time he opened the book, he saw Grandpa, not the man in Charles Bennett's reflection, but the storyteller who played harmonica for corn. And in Vermont, where the land never hides the truth, Jamie knew Grandpa felt it too. A story not hidden, but lived.